All right, who in here plays sports? Anyone can raise their hand. All right, I'm a fat guy, so props to you guys. All right, who here, keep your hands up, is female? Anybody in here? Well, I mean, obviously some people, but who here plays sports and is female? Okay, now.
So out of view with your hands raised, could you imagine if you weren't given the same athletic opportunities as your male counterparts just because you were female?
Well, before Title IX, that was the case.
Title IX was established on June 23rd, 1972 in order to equalize the gender gap within the athletic departments.
A quote from the legal document of Title IX states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be denied the benefits of any education program or activity.
Now, before Title IX, this is around 1972, 1973. You need to know that date. There'll be a quiz. There were very few female collegiate athletes. This means that in college, there were very few females playing sports. This includes intramurals, clubs, any of those kind of sporty kind of associations.
And before the Title IX Act was made, there was only 16,000 collegiate athletes.
There was also a lack of representation, as now we have groups like NOW, the National Organization for Women, to recognize some of these groups and try to aid them. We didn't have that, so Title IX helped to give representation for those groups, as well as provide guidelines for how things should work, how it should be structured for those groups in athletics.
And now we have a set guideline for schools in Kentucky, and our school in particular. We have a thick data report that we have to send in annually that records and monitors our compliance with Title IX.
Since the passing of Title IX, the amount of girls participating in high school sports has greatly increased. In 1971, which was before Title IX, there were only around 300,000 girls participating in high school sports, but in 1994 to 1995, this number jumped to 2,300,000, although boys do still have more.
The co-president of the National Women's Law Center says that basically it's not fair for male athletes to be given preferential treatment compared to female athletes.
Now, here you can see several sports. Now, for the first two, you would normally think that they're more male-dominated. And this is normally the case, but with Title IX, there has to be equality between sports. If you have a male team, you need a female team. It doesn't have to be the same sport, but you still have to have that balance. If you look at field hockey over here, we're used to it being a female sport. But now, in like Florida and other states, it actually has a male component. What's surprising, I guess most of you guys will find, is that a lot of sports where it's normally combative and male-dominated, females have started coming into. It's actually interesting to see. You have boxing, wrestling, those kind of things.
Although Title IX has done a good job making that gender gap smaller within athletics, there's still many flaws that need to be reformed. For example, in our interview with Mr. Yankee, who is the director of athletics for North Oldham High School, he told us that sometimes the perception that boys get preferential treatment over girls is greater than the actual reality of the situation. He had a first-hand experience with this because he is the girls' track coach for North Oldham, and he said in most cases, girls do get the same amount of opportunities as boys.
And it does not apply to private schooling and military-based schooling because of federal funding. And that was a problem in the Grove City versus Bell court case, which was taken to the Supreme Court. And basically, the college, Grove City College, didn't think that they were under federal regulation because they were not receiving direct federal funding. But they were receiving Pell Grants, which is money given to a student that they don't have to pay back in order to go to college. And because of that, they were still under compliance. But the fact that not every school has to follow Title IX and that there's little discrepancies, it creates flaws in the system.
During our interview with Mr. Yankee, he told us a story about a new student who came to North Oldham this year who approached him, and he was from Florida, and he asked if he could try out for the boys field hockey team, to where Mr. Yankee had to respond saying that we don't have a boys field hockey team because there's never been a demand for one.
And this is a great example of a flaw in the system, because if there was to be a male's field hockey team, that would upset the balance, and there'd be one more male team, and there would be a female team. So then the school would have to go to the trouble of finding another female team to balance that number out, or some other alternative. So they'd have to balance it out. So then that person who moved here would not be able to play the sport they wanted to, just because of all the balancing.
It's also very hard to equalize the amount of sports per male and females in a school because men and women prefer different kinds of sports. Men prefer combative sports that involve direct physical contact, while females prefer sports that are stylistic and emphasize elegance instead.
Another flaw within the system of Title IX is that it isn't uniform across the country. For example, in Michigan, they're very lenient on what they require each school to send in as far as a data report. But in Kentucky, as Molly said, each school is required to send in a very thick data report which specifies how many sports there are for each gender and the cost for these sports to try to close that gender gap.
To fix this problem, we propose that we create a national data report so that the amount of flaws can be decreased and so that we can focus on equalizing and diminishing the gender gap within the athletic departments.
If it was all structured the same, then you'd be able to compile all of this data into one national data report, which would be easier to show trends in the data to show if the gender gap was lessening in athletics. So instead of having it on a state-by-state basis, we have to compile all that data and kind of figure out, so generally what's happening. You know for sure nationally what's going on.